How's it going? Junior's Fishing Company here, another fly tying video. The first two videos I did were with marabou, so I thought today I would do some deer hair. We're going to do deer hair, little ostrich, there's going to be some peacock in there. This is a 1/4 ounce Storm SearchBait, I think. It's got a little rattle in it. I'm not sure what size hook that is. Looks like it might be a 1/0, some sort of 1/0 maybe. But I have to tie this as I tie a lot of these jigs. It'll be upside down, so it will swim like this. So when you're tying, that's what you kind of have to be careful with, remembering that any flash you put on top will actually ride on the bottom. So if you want flash on top when it's swimming like this, you'll end up tying it in on the bottom. The first thing I'm going to put, before I put down my base of, I'm going to put a little base of deer hair. I've got this ostrich. Ostrich is really tricky, especially if you order it online, because you can't see what you're getting. For example, this is a decent ostrich. I mean, they're long, right? But you can order something like this. This is like a light olive, and this is great for like a scud. You know, a couple of these wrapped on a scud hook make a good scud legs. But this is the same same brand, same company, and this is the difference. So you can see, I mean, these back ones are at least twice as long as the light olive, and then you can get even more higher quality stuff. I mean, these are almost a foot long. Some of these might even be a foot. So if you're ordering online, you just got to be really careful, and you just got to hope for the best. Same thing kind of goes with deer hair. When you order a deer, I'm not going to go super into like the details of deer hair and where to cut and stuff like that, but some tails are going to have really long fibers, and some are going to have super short. So if you're just getting into deer hair, I suggest you go to a place like Musky Fool. They grade each one of their bucktails, and I'm sure they dye them themselves. So you can go to Musky Fool, and they'll have 4 different. They'll have AAA, AA, single A, and then even I think they call it like Clouser. You're going to want to be careful, because if you order from just a random website that sells mass stuff, you might get 2-inch hair, you might get 5-inch hair, and you won't even know it. Musky Fool it'll be different prices. I mean, the primo stuff, the AAA stuff, I think it's like 20 bucks a tail, but it's worth it, right? So on a small jig like this, I'm not worried. I mean, I can even get away with this super short stuff. But if you're going to be tying some bigger flies and things like that, and you're going to be using ostrich or deer hair, you just want to be careful when you're ordering. So I'm using 210 Black UTC. There's some ribs on here that you'll just have to, I'm going to end up filling them in, because it's not necessarily going to help me with my wrapping of deer hair. So I kind of want to even out these holes. And you know, like a lot of the jigs I tie, they're just going to be bait keepers and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that you get these filled in. I'm going to actually tie my ostrich on the hook, not the plastic guards. So this bait is about 1 3/4 inches long. I could probably get away with, you know, if you double, I mean, you get to 4-ish, right? So, you know, 3.5. But I'm gonna actually end up going to like 5 1/4. The ostrich shrinks a lot, so I'm not really worried about a decent length coming off the back of this hook. Before I put any ostrich on, I'm actually gonna put a base layer of deer hair. That's gonna help prevent the ostrich from wrapping around my hook, but it's also gonna add just a little bit more bulk to that back tail. I've already prepped all my deer hair just because you don't need to watch me spend 10 minutes stacking deer hair. This is olive and black. I'm going to use that, and then you'll see in a minute the other colors I'm going to do. I try to just to match the jig, right? So it's like a dark olive on top, and it kind of transitions to a light green on the bottom. So I'm going to try and, I'm guessing it's a baby bass pattern or something like that. So I'm going to go to a little bit onto my brass with my ostrich. So I want to come a little bit closer with my layer of bucktail. So maybe like right there. And deer hair can be messy. So that should be good. Make sure and spin your thread. You want it nice and tight. And then you'll get 2 loose wraps and cinch down. And then use your thumb to wrap around. I always want to keep thread pressure on there. Make sure it's 360. That hook kind of gets in the way a little bit, but you can move them on either side with a bodkin or something like that. So make sure that looks pretty good. And I'm gonna just wrap all the way up and get a nice even base for my ostrich. And I'll add a little bit of glue just to make sure those lock in and stay where I want them to. So if this is going to be a baby bass pattern, I've got olives and blacks and whites. I'm going to put a little flash in here as well. So I've got my peacock. This is some olive, black, and white. You want to make sure on a good feather like this, plume, I think, you don't want to just cut your longest stuff and have to trim it down. The stuff at the top right here is a little bit shorter, so I don't need this super long. I'm going to save this for when I'm actually going to need, you know, a 10-inch plume feather, fiber, I don't know. So make sure that you're trimming from really the length that you're going to need it. I'm going to try and work this 360 around the bait. I'm going to come down pretty far. I'm going to give it a loose wrap, maybe 2. Then I'm going to push these feathers around to make, I just want to avoid the hook a little bit. I don't need to go completely around because I don't want it getting wrapped when I'm jigging and casting and stuff. It's really easy to tie this ostrich in. It's a really soft fiber. Now I'm going to add some flash. I've got some flash right here. This is Holographic Flashabou. I think it was Moonlight. It said Moon on the package, but I think it's Moonlight. So I'm going to taper these out a little. I'm really not going to use much of this. I don't want it to be any longer than my ostrich is. Wrap that in. Spin it around. Make sure that's down. Then I'm going to put a little bit up here. Kind of work that around and then pull back. Make sure that's cinched down, and while I have this in my hands, I'm going to taper cut this. So that it's tapered. And I think that might be good. I don't need too much flash in there. Maybe I'll leave a couple and do a couple more. And I'll save this stuff for another jig. So, ostrich is down, tinsel's down. I'm going to start with my bucktail. And I've got 3 prepped and ready to go. I don't need to do too much. It's really hard with bucktail to use too much. Or too little. It's really hard to use too little. It's easy to use too much. So I just want to be careful. And while I'm letting this glue dry, I'll show you how I cut, or how I decide where to cut. So maybe I'll use this tail, might be easiest. So you've got your tail here. This deer hair that I used here, I don't want any flare. So I cut from the very, very, very top of this tail. And that's going to have the least amount of air in it, or none. So this is what I'll use on just a filler like this, so it doesn't flare. And as you go down, as you get to the bottom, this stuff is really, when you cinch down with your thread, it's going to flare a ton. So the first one I cut was up here, and then the other 3 stacks I did like one right here, and then one down here. So as I get closer to the head of the bait, I'm working my way down on the tail, just because I want a little bit more flare each time as I'm tying down. And I'm just going to do 3. I'm going to put 1 down now. Stack these. Make sure they're even. I don't have a hair stacker, but you can just bang it on your table. And they should be pretty lined up. Now this is quite a bit of hair, but I don't want to go all the way down. And you can really do however you want, any length that you want, or I want it so I have plenty of ostrich on the back. And I'm actually going to wrap in where that first indent was. Maybe right there. So I'll mark that spot. I'm going to cut it. There's a lot of good hair scissors out there. This is Dr. Slick hair scissors. I think these are the 5-inch. But if you go to like your bait shop, or I might have gotten these at Scheels, they have buckets of these Rapala scissors. They're serrated. They work great for cutting deer hair, and they're like $4. So I'll buy a bunch, and I'll actually put a date on it of when I started using it. And I know, okay, I've had this, I mean, this one's really old, but okay, I've used this for 2 months. I've been using deer hair now. I'll put one of these in a tackle box, and I'll keep using it somewhere else. But those work great for cutting hair because they're serrated. So I'm going to cord up my thread, and I'm going to give it 1, 2, pinch down, and then I'll loosen up a little bit. And then I'm going to work this hair all the way around my bait. And this won't flare much at all. And when I think I've got it, you want to make sure it's not just all the way around, but evenly. Especially, I'm not reverse tying these. If you're going to reverse tie it, and you have one clump, like here on top that's super thick, and then here it's really thin, you'll be able to see that when you... So now I'm going to cinch down, and you can see that flare just a little bit. And all tails are going to be different, right? Some at the top, there's still some flare. Some at the bottom, there's not a ton. I'm going to give it a couple good tight wraps. I mean, you're flirting with breaking your thread. And then I'll come around and trim off. Deer hair is very messy. So don't do this when your wife's watching. So that's my first layer of bucktail, and there's just a little bit of flare in there. And when I'm doing this, I actually like to use head cement instead of super glue. That head cement absorbs a lot better into the hair because it's so much thinner. I mean, you could probably get a thin super glue, but this goes right, you can see it just sucks into the hair, and so you know that when it hardens you'll be good to go. So I'll come right down where that hair ended, and I'm going to do my second one, and then I'm going to add my flash. So I've got my second one prepped and ready to go. Get some more of those short, thin stubs out. Quite a bit in there. Some tails have a ton of that small underfur, and then some have almost none. So now I'll figure out, I want to go a little bit, I want to taper this. So if I look, that first hair goes to like here. So if I kind of jump up to here, it should be kind of where I want it. Cord up my thread again. Make sure my hair is trimmed evenly. 1, 2, cinch down. Loosen it a little. Now, you have to use a little bit more hair every time. because this base, the hook, gets thicker. And so the more hook you have, because that plastic weed guard, or not weed guard, bait keeper or whatever, you just need. Alright, sorry, I just realized the camera stopped recording. Just missed a little bit though. So I've got that second layer of bucktail in. I've got some tinsel in the back. I would usually put more tinsel on here, but I just got these Peacock Herls. I was at Shields and I saw them. It's like a dye. It says bright green, but looking at the bases of them, it's like a light blue. They're super shiny. You can kind of see it. And so I thought I'm going to tie some of these in instead of my tinsel. So I'm just going to grab a couple at a time and make sure they're relatively tapered. And then I'm going to tie them in around the bait. So I've got my last stack of bucktail, and again I just want it to be shorter than that middle one, so it'd be about right there. Now I do these heads. It's a lot different than if you've just got just a plain, you know, the eye of the hook's right here, like on a fly. So it's gonna, it's a little bit trickier to do than just wrapping it off. There's one little technique that I do at the end, and it's gonna be even weirder to do it because this slopes in, that slopes in, the side, it's just a weird head, and this isn't meant to be used how I'm using it. They don't, Storm wasn't like, well, just in case someone ties with it. So when I tie in, make sure they're even. I'm gonna actually leave a good amount. Usually people would tie it in right there, but that's gonna build up my collar too much. I'm gonna tie in right here, and I'm going to leave, that's probably a little more than 1/4 inch of hair up above by the head of the jig. I'm going to pull towards the head, and you can already see that stuff is flaring. It's just going to be kind of tricky to wrap this because it's like a square head. Kind of got to work it around. Keep thread pressure. Try and get as much of that up as you can, especially because this is going to be the top of the bait, so you want to make sure there's hair. 360, that looks decent. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now, if I cinch down, it'll wrap just a little, but... And what I'm going to do, I'm going to fold this back, and I'm going to lose some hairs doing this. But that's alright. Before I ream down on it too much, I'm going to try and get most of these front hairs past back on top of the head so I can make some wraps without flaring the tips that are in my hand. I want the hair to do it, but you'll see why I'm holding these down in just a sec. That's decent. So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a X-Acto knife, and I'm going to come in here, and I'm actually going to, right on my thread, I'm going to go right by my black thread, and this would be kind of like, you know, if you were spinning deer hair for a frog or something like that, or I guess even like a Buford with the heads. Looks like I want a few wraps down there, because just in case I snip my thread, I've got some wraps on here. You know, you might snip your thread, that's fine, but you don't want to be 2 wraps in and then cut the hairs out, because if you do hit your thread with 2 wraps, then it'll loosen up. But I've got some on there now, so I'm just going to take it and I'm going to push right by my thread. And again, this is a very oddly shaped head. So I've got most of those little ones trimmed away, and again, when you're cutting hair like that, it is messy. So I just want to make sure I've got all my thread covered, or my hair's covered, and there's a couple really didn't want to get cut, but now it'll be a little bit easier to whip finish on this. The other 2 ones I've posted, I haven't even whip finished at the end. This will be a little bit of an easier whip finish, but I'm going to coat, I'm going to actually do head cement at the front of this one, just because I don't like to get super glue all over these hairs. Like 4 turns. So just Wapsi water-based head cement. And you could, thinking about it now, I could have done still could do it. A red collar. I know a lot of people just pretty much strictly use like white thread or black, because does it make a huge difference? Not really. I don't know if it's necessarily going to catch you more fish or anything like that, but yeah, so there you have it. This is, again, I don't know what size hook this is. I think it might be a 1/0. Appreciate watching. Baby bass pattern. Follow us on Instagram, Juniors Fishing Company. Visit us at juniorsfishing.com. Next one I think I might do, maybe I'll do another deer hair one. But I think this one turned out pretty good. Thanks again.